Hello and welcome to our special program, Democracies of the World, our show on Sansad TV, where we take you through the latest happenings from parliaments across the globe. In today's edition, we will talk about how much the war in Ukraine affects the politics of European countries. In the next half an hour, we will also take a look at how does Brazil's election system work and much more. I'm your host, Bhwana Nayar. Let's begin our show with Austrian elections. Austria elected its federal president on October 9th, choosing to keep the incumbent Alexander Van der Bellen, who won a clear majority against the other 6 candidates in the first round. Speaking to supporters, he called his victory a win for a united Europe. The 78-year-old will serve another 6 years as the Austrian president in his second term. Here are the details.
Austrian President Alexander Van der Bellen is set to stay in office for second 6-year term. He won a clear majority of votes in an election held on October 9th and thus avoid a runoff according to projections based on almost all votes cast. Neither of the main centrist parties fielded candidates in the election, and senior figures from both backed Van der Bellen, a 78-year-old former leader of the Greens. The far-right Freedom Party was the only party in parliament to put forward a candidate against the president. Van der Bellen thanked voters for turning up to the election and called his victory a victory for Europe. The 78-year-old former leader of the Greens has garnered broad popularity by projecting calm during times of national crisis, including the collapse of the government in 2019 and the resignation of Chancellor in 2021 over corruption allegations. Van der Bellen has the explicit or implicit backing of Austria's major parties except for the Freedom Party. Van der Bellen was born during World War II in Vienna to an aristocratic Russian father and an Estonian mother who fled Stalinism. He studied economics at the University of Innsbruck and finished his doctorate in 1970 before going on to become Dean of Economics at the University of Vienna. The Austrian president has a largely ceremonial role, but the office holder also has sweeping powers during periods of overseeing transition and turbulence. The president is the commander-in-chief of the army and can sack the whole government or the chancellor. About 6.4 million people were eligible to vote out of a population of 9 million. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Moving on, Malaysia's Prime Minister dissolved his country's parliament on October 10th to clear the way for snap elections expected to be held in early November. The move is an attempt to restore political stability as the country emerges from the ravages of COVID-19 and a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. Following the development, former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad has announced that he will contest in general elections but did not clarify on whether he will take the Prime Minister office once again or not. Malaysia has been in political turmoil since the last national elections in 2018. Have a look.
In a bid to restore political stability, Malaysia's Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob has dissolved Parliament to clear the way for snap elections that are expected to be held in early November. Polls were not due until September next year, but Ismail faced intense pressure from within his United Malays National Organisation party to dissolve the parliament and secure a strong mandate in early elections. UMNO, the biggest party in the ruling coalition, was feuding with its allies and is aiming for a big win on its own. Ismail met King Sultan Abdullah Sultan Ahmed Shah on Sunday, who consented to the dissolution. He said he decided to call early polls to counter criticism over the legitimacy of his government, the third since 2018 polls. The Election Commission is expected to meet within the week to announce a date for the vote, which must be held within 60 days from Parliament's dissolution. It is likely to be held early November, before the year-end monsoon season that often brings devastating floods. UMNO's allies in the government and opposition parties have protested plans to hold elections during the monsoon season, which last year killed more than 50 people and displaced thousands. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Moving on, former Bulgarian Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, who won the recently held 4th parliamentary election, has urged his opponents to join him at the negotiating table as the country looks to form a new government. Borisov's centre-right party, GERB, took the biggest share of votes in Bulgaria's parliamentary election held on October 2nd. Bulgaria also faces challenges from high inflation, rising energy costs, joining the Eurozone and becoming part of the European visa-free Schengen area. Take a look at this report.
Former Bulgarian Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, whose centre-right party emerged as the winner of the Bulgaria's parliamentary election, has offered talks to his political opponents to form a government. Results from the October 2nd vote showed centre-right party earning 25.33% of the vote, edging out the reformist We Continue the Change party, founded a year ago by 2 Harvard graduates, by more than 5 percentage points. 5 other parties made it into the 240-seat chamber. The early election came after a fragile coalition led by Kirill Petkov of the We Continue to Change party lost a no-confidence vote in June amid soaring inflation. This is the 4th parliamentary snap election since 2021, an unprecedented situation in Bulgarian history, the previous ones being the April, July and November 2021 elections. Borisov has previously served 3 separate terms in Bulgaria's top job, and tackling graft became a key part of an election last November. Meanwhile, former Bulgarian Prime Minister Petkov, who conceded defeat, said that now centre-right party had the responsibility to form a coalition and govern the country. Petkov ran on promises to continue efforts to eradicate corruption, but a European energy crisis sparked by Russia's war on Ukraine was the dominant economic theme for voters. Whoever leads Bulgaria's next government, the EU's poorest nation faces a host of challenges. Inflation has continued to soar, hitting 15% in August, as energy prices spiral amid a dispute with the Russian state-owned gas giant Gazprom. Besides that, ministers will also face a difficult challenge managing the country's relationship with Moscow after Petkov's government turned its back on Vladimir Putin's regime in April. Bulgaria is an EU and NATO member, and Borisov recently called President Putin the clear aggressor in Russia's war with Ukraine. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
And now news from one of the world's biggest democracies, Brazil, where top 2 presidential candidates will face each other later this month in a runoff vote after none of the candidates could cross the 50% mark in the October 2nd elections. Meanwhile, both the candidates, leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, have stepped up their electoral campaigning ahead of the second round of elections on October 30th. Here's a report.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and his leftist challenger Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva have intensified their campaigning ahead of this month's runoff election. While Bolsonaro attended a religious event in Belém, his rival Lula da Silva rallied in Campinas in front of a large crowd. Earlier, former president and candidate Lula also led a mass rally in Sao Paulo as Bolsonaro met with a group of children at the presidential palace in Brasilia. Both candidates campaigned in the cities where they did not perform well in the first round of voting on October 2nd. Brazil's electoral court said the electoral campaign will end on October 28th, 2 days before the presidential election. The second round of Brazil's presidential campaign kicked off last week after Jair Bolsonaro outperformed polling and robbed Lula da Silva of an outright victory in the first round of voting. Lula is leading Bolsonaro with 49% of voter support against the incumbent's 44%, ahead of an October 30th runoff vote, according to a poll published last week. The survey by pollster Datafolha was conducted from October 5th to 7th, interviewing 2,884 people with a margin of error of 2 percentage points up or down. Lula and Bolsonaro are both hunting endorsements as they retool their campaigns to secure a victory in the most polarized election since Brazil's return to democracy in the 1980s. The unexpectedly strong showing by Bolsonaro on October 2nd dashed hopes for a quick resolution to the deeply polarized election in the world's fourth largest democracy. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Brazil's high-stakes presidential vote on October 2nd did not yield a first-round winner with the necessary majority for an outright win, setting up a tense two-man race later this month featuring polar opposites Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Jair Bolsonaro. Let's take a look now at how does Brazil's election system actually work.
Brazil, like many other Latin American countries, employs a two-round system for its presidential elections. In the first round, multiple candidates take part. All the votes each candidate receives across the country are tallied. If no single candidate achieves more than 50% of the vote, the top two candidates head to a runoff on a later scheduled date. Winning outright in the first round is rare, but not unprecedented. In the 1990s, Fernando Henrique Cardoso won 2 presidential terms outright in first-round voting. There were 11 candidates who took part on October 2nd elections. Since none of the field backed at least half of the vote, the top two, leftist former leader Lula and incumbent far-right President Bolsonaro, advanced to a second-round election scheduled for October 30th. With 99.7% of votes counted, Lula won 48.4% of votes versus 43.3% for Bolsonaro, according to vote totals released by National Electoral Authority. Bolsonaro did better than expected in opinion polls. Both Lula and Bolsonaro are now likely to concentrate on how to sway those who voted for one of the other 9 candidates who were eliminated in the first round. Overall, 8% of October 2nd's voters opted for candidates other than Lula or Bolsonaro. But since Lula only needs to pick up less than 2% to cobble together a majority, he enters the final stretch with an edge. Voting is compulsory in Brazil for all those who are literate and aged between 18 and 70, with more than 156 million registered voters eligible. However, some still choose not to vote, which incurs a minor fine.
Moving on to our next story, to a South African country, Lesotho, where a businessman turned politician, Sam Matekane, is set to become the country's next prime minister after cobbling together a coalition headed by his Revolution for Prosperity party. Matekane, whose party was only launched in March this year, won 56 of the legislature's 120 seats in latest week's general election. The Democratic Congress Party came in second, securing 29 lawmakers. Just 7 months old, the party attracted support from young voters eager for change in Lesotho, a constitutional kingdom of 2.1 million people entirely surrounded by South Africa's Drakensberg Mountains. Throughout the campaign, Matekane emphasized the need for his party to govern alone in order to fully implement its development agenda to lift the country out of endemic poverty, high unemployment and rampant crime. The small mountain kingdom has been governed for the past decade by a string of coalition governments, and no premier has served out a full 5-year term. Slipping into a very short break here, there's a lot more coming up on the other side. You stay tuned to Sansad TV for more news. Welcome back after the break. You're watching our special program, Democracies of the World. News now from Italy, where tens of thousands of union workers marched through the streets of central Rome this week to demand fair working conditions and social justice. In the wake of recent election victory of far-right leader Giorgia Meloni, protesters from all over Italy gathered in the central Piazza della Repubblica, waving flags of the CGIL, Italy's main trade union. They put forward 10 proposals, including increases in wages and pensions, the introduction of minimum wage, a cap on utility bills, among others. On Friday, European Union leaders struggled to bridge significant differences over a natural gas price cap as winter approaches and Russia's war in Ukraine fuels a major energy crisis, driving up prices for consumers and businesses across the continent. Moving on, Bosnia Herzegovina has ordered a recount of vote for president of the Balkan country's Serb entity after the opposition disputed the preliminary results, calling the elections a fraud. General elections were held in Bosnia and Herzegovina on 2nd October 2022. Final results are yet to be announced, although leading Bosnian Serb politician Milorad Dodik has claimed victory in the election for the post of presidency of the Serb entity. Meanwhile, thousands of people rallied in Bosnia for the second time in a week, alleging that a pro-Russian Bosnian Serb leader rigged a ballot during a general election.
Thousands of supporters of the opposition in the Serbian entity of Bosnia Herzegovina are protesting the result of a recent presidential election, alleging fraud. The 2nd October election was held for all levels of government in both the Serb-dominated and Bosniak-Croat parts of the Balkan country, as well as for the joint central institutions. The demonstrators called for a repeat of Sunday's vote for the president of Republika Srpska. Meanwhile, leading Bosnian Serb politician Milorad Dodik has claimed victory in the election for the post of presidency of the Serb entity. Opposition leaders, however, claim that their candidate Elina Trivic is the winner and that Dodik rigged the ballot. Dodik, who has denied the election fraud allegations, has been the most powerful politician in Republika Srpska for years. He has close relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, while the United States and Britain have sanctioned him for allegedly trying to undermine peace and stability in the country. Bosnia has been governed by an administrative system created by Dayton Peace Accord in 1995, which ended 3 years of war in the former Yugoslav Republic, marked by ethnic cleansing and brutality. The Balkan nation of 3.3 million people remains plagued by corruption and ethnic tensions that have impeded efforts to join the European Union. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
News now from Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan President's office said that the country remains a middle-income country even as it requested the World Bank to grant concessional loans to tide over the unprecedented economic crisis. This was after the cabinet approved a proposal to downgrade the island nation's economic status to a low-income country. Sri Lanka had a GDP of $3,815 in 2021 that currently places the country in the middle-income category. The South Asian island of 22 million people is battling its worst economic crisis since independence in 1948. In mid-April, Sri Lanka declared its international debt default due to the forex crisis. The crisis has led to an acute dollar shortage to pay for imports of food, fuel and medicine, a plunge in the rupee and runaway inflation. Moving on to our next story, Lebanon and Israel have finally agreed to a historic deal regarding their maritime borders, ending their long-running feud over the gas-rich Mediterranean Sea. Israel's Prime Minister said on Tuesday that the country has reached an historic agreement with neighboring Lebanon over their shared maritime border after months of US-brokered negotiations. Premier Yair Lapid said the deal will strengthen Israel's security, inject billions into Israel's economy, and ensure the stability of our northern border. Israel's Prime Minister office informed that the date of the signing is yet to be announced. The process will take a while to get signed as Israel, Knesset and High Court have to agree to the decision. Moving on, New Zealand's government has proposed taxing the greenhouse gases that farm animals make from burping as part of a plan to tackle climate change. The government said the farm levy would be the world's first and that farmers should be able to recoup the cost of charging for more climate-friendly products. But farmers quickly condemned the plan. Opposition lawmakers from the conservative ACT party said the plan would actually increase worldwide emissions by moving farming to other countries that were less efficient at making food. New Zealand farming industry is vital to its economy. Dairy products, including those used to make infant formula in China, are the nation's largest export earner. And that's all we have in this edition of our program on Democracies of the World. Connect with us on various social media platforms for all the latest from around the world. Thank you for staying in. Stay tuned for more informative programs on Sansad TV. Till then, goodbye. Namaskar.